Hello and welcome to the Construct Cast, the place where we build ideas together. I'm your host, James Darian, and let's get started. Today, I would like to discuss taxation and alternative forms of funding the government. So, there's always that libertarian idea that taxation is theft. Now, I don't really like to go into it that deeply, but I do believe that myself and everyone else has their qualms with taxation. I'm talking about it today, after all, because I just paid mine today after putting it off for a couple months. And I was thinking, what are some things the government could do to get money that it currently is not doing? So, initially, my first thought is, what about licensing public goods or public properties, I would say? That might be a better phrasing for it. So, say the government could license off the name to Yellowstone Park. Imagine how much money Apple could pay to get their branding alongside Yellowstone Park. And the price to admission, the price for the license, would be essentially them taking care of the park, plus there could be a bidding to see which companies would compete with to see who could give the best deal to the government for that license. So maybe some companies might say, oh, it's worth a couple $100 million to them. Maybe another says it's only worth 10, so the government signs a contract with one that's offering a couple $100 million or more. This way, it creates a flow of competition in government funding. It can spur a lot of growth, and it can help really it can take care of the park as well as help fund other services without being a net cost at all to the government or to the people. It won't have a public cost because it will be bringing in revenue, not being an expense. And the other idea that came after this was reformatting the ways that the government does benefits. This is the idea that I think people might like the most, which is taking government benefits and saying the government will no longer purchase benefits for anyone. The government won't purchase them. Instead, any company that offers benefits to government employees can write off all of those benefits as a charitable donation, or it could be as a tax write-off or something. So, in a way, you could say it costs the government money because they're not making tax revenue on all the benefits they're receiving. However, tax write-offs tend to write off less than the government's going to charge. If you're writing off $90, that doesn't mean you're paying $90 in less tax. It means you have $90 of less income that you're paying tax on. So that might only be maybe I should have said $100, so I could just say like $25, but something like that. $20, let's say, if you're in a medium to higher tax bracket. Or let's just say $15 for your average person. So that could be a net contributor both in terms of revenue and expense, because these companies are getting write-offs, and companies tend to not pay too many taxes after write-offs anyways. But this gives them another venue for getting tax write-offs, and it'll give the government a way to get something for their employees that, once again, they don't need to fund themselves. I think getting the funding outside of the public is the best, may be the best way to fund government. Now, to play devil's advocate with my own idea, there could be an idea of sort of a corporate entanglement with the government. If the government is only funded by corporations, the government will possibly prop up select corporations, and it could create a very poisonous dichotomy between the public-private sector, and that definitely has its own dangers that we want to find a way to avoid. I believe we would need to write a constitutional amendment around this in order to mitigate that, in order to make sure that the government interest does not fall into the private funders, essentially. But this is a beginning of an idea that I'm working on, because I remember listening to Larry Sharpe talk about licensing off bridges or tunnels, like the Lincoln Tunnel in New York when he was running for governor. It has a $7.50 tax on it, or charge, just to cross it. What if we sold that to, I don't know, some other company? I forget who he mentioned at the time. I'm just going to use Apple again because Apple's easy. But they have a ton of money, so they changed the Lincoln Bridge or Lincoln Tunnel to the Lincoln Apple Tunnel, and suddenly, boom, they take care of it, and there is no more toll. That's one thing. Make it so that the government, when they license any of these places off, the companies are not allowed to charge a toll. They're not allowed to charge the public in any way for access to these public areas. They are simply licensing the name, and they are promising to take care of the land while paying a licensing fee to associate themselves with it. That would be that is the initial idea. Then there's definitely more layers to work through going down to make sure that we don't do anything that gets too greedy or gets too cross-contamination between the companies and the government. Like, we don't want people who run these companies or are heavily associated with these companies to be able to go into government, then make deals with them, and then come out of government and get their job back with a really big bonus, or do anything simultaneously. We want to avoid that. So there's definitely some aspects of representation that we need to avoid. I would say, for one thing, you cannot lobby for a business and be involved in any of the decision making for matters regarding that business from a representative perspective. Because even though your constituents might have an interest in that, say you're from Georgia and you want to do something with the Okefenokee Swamp, you want to protect it, but you don't want your Georgia representative to be a company that's interested in licensing off the Okefenokee Swamp. That's how you pronounce that, right? I think so. Anyhow, if your representative for that area is there and they have a vested interest in the swamp for some reason, and their company just really wants to license it out, or Stone Mountain, they really want to have some vested interest in it. I don't think Stone Mountain's public, but, whatever. Is it public? I'll look into that later. Anyhow, you don't want the company to be both the representative for that area and have that contention where they're maybe not acting in the best interest of the people they're representing, because they're acting in the interest of the business that wants to deal with this swamp or this mountain or whatever national park that they might be trying to work with. We definitely need some constitutional amendments to avoid that type of stuff. But this is all building something from the ground up. So I'm wanting us to look at this from the perspective of, if we are designing a system, then we're going to account for all of this all of these conflicts of interest and other aspects of it when we would implement this stuff. We would, of course, go through multiple logistics and try to debate out and refine the idea so that we're not going to have these conflicts here. I mean, one idea, of course, could be just if you're working for a company involved in lobbying or any of these other aspects, you cannot return to a position in any of these fields for, say, 5 years after you finish your term. And maybe if you are actively in the bidding for a position, if you are working for one of these companies looking to get a license with the government, then you are blocked from running for public office for, I'm not going to say a long time, maybe 2 years, maybe 1 or 2 years, just so you have to be out of that position for at least a bit of time so that there can be some distance and you're not going to have that direct vested interest so immediately important to your life involved with all of this. So now that we've covered the more direct contribution method of funding the government, and I wouldn't call it taxation. This definitely doesn't seem like taxation. Government licensing is what we're going to go with for that. So beyond getting funding from licensing and getting benefits from essentially tax breaks for companies, what else can the government do to earn revenue? Well, for one thing, I think license off the government brandings. And, well, I guess this ties in with licensing, but the government has NASA, they have the Army, they have all of these different organizations, especially military, and kids love toys. So they could, of course, license off all the branches for military toys, Army branded toys, Army branded cars too. I mean, think of that. American cars love using toughness as a branding. Imagine if you could have the Army Jeep, the Navy, the Navy Ford, or something like that. You know, something to really get people kind of hyped around these branded products. And you could even create like a sports atmosphere to it. You could license off military branch identities to, like, I already see the Army has an esports team, but they could do professional sports. What if they let professional sports investors come into the military and look through recruits to get people to get recruits that can work on an NFL team, Army brand NFL team, or Marines based on NFL team, Semper Fi. My friend was a Marine, and I think he would be down for this. I think a ton of people who work for the military would be down for this. You wouldn't have to pay them the salaries that other NFL players are paid, and because they work for the government, of course, and that wouldn't be expected to receive that kind of money. It gives them a direct path to an out of military position. They could go from military and end up playing for, I live near Jacksonville, so the Jacksonville Jaguars. Okay, that might not be so glorious, but even a better team. That could be, it could be seen as a form of training for them. Sports are traditionally or anthropologically a way to train for military combat, so we could see it as part of their training. we could see it as a way to raise funding. And imagine all the advertisements you could get and licensing just from the team being sold to either corporations or something. And you don't even need to do that because you could just build the arena, host the events, and sponsors for those events, for those games. You could sell tickets to the games, or maybe you want the games to be free and you don't sell tickets, you just have the advertising. And maybe you sell products there. I mean, sports ball arena products are already sold at a premium. I'm not super athletic, but I feel like that's a good way to cover any kind of athletic activity, to say sports ball. But yeah, so you could look at all of this, and there are some options, and that could help supply a lot of funding to the government, or to each branch of the military who has their own team. It may not be a fully funding idea, but it's just one more way to get funding, and it eases the burden off of the taxpayer. Of course, we may still have a need for forms of taxes because our expenses are just through the roof these days, and I would love for us to get them down. I don't see that happening as long as we are a first world nation. I do not see the U.S. ever lowering their expenses, unfortunately. But I can get to that in another podcast. This is purely discussing funding, so I think that's a good idea. You've got the toy lines going off, and kids go nuts for toy soldiers and whatnot. And let's see, what other ideas are there? You have NASA inventing new things all the time. I mean, NASA invented GPS, and people use GPS all the time. But that is basically given out for free. And I know it is a public good, funded and created through public funding, because the U.S. people pay taxes. Those taxes were used to investigate all these ideas and these technologies, and we got results. So now it was given back to the public. But I think all of these patents and whatnot that the government sells, or the government creates, I think they should have licensing associations. I don't think they should necessarily charge up front for them, but if you're making a product that uses them, then there needs to be a royalty premium on them, and not a high one, not a high one at all. Like I'm not even talking 2%. I mean, like, maybe there is a 0.5 or 0.1% royalty fee off of, I guess it has to be revenue, or a 0.1 royalty fee based off of possibly even the cost of the product, the cost of making the product. That way, you're not even paying a fee based on what you sell it for, but just the cost to make it. So if you can make the product for $300, and now it's just like, okay, well, I'm going to pay maybe $3, so 1%. I'll pay $3 in royalty back to the government per item I'm producing, but I'm selling this product for $350, or maybe I'm selling the product for $1,200 or $1,300. So you could make however much money you want off the product, but the fee is only going to be associated with the cost to develop the product. I think that might be a little bit easier on the companies making the products, and it might be easier on the purchaser of the products, because if there's a 1% fee on a product sold at $1,000, you're paying $10 more. If it's going to be a licensing fee of a product that costs $300 to make, that's only $3, but they're still selling it for $1,000. So maybe it could end up equating to lower cost to the user, depending on how many fees are associated. Maybe it has like 5 or 10 different licenses in one single product, so it's closer to a 10% fee or a 5% fee. So writing that down, so it's not on the cost of sale, but it's on the cost of production. That might be an idea. And I'm just, again, this podcast is all about coming up with ideas, discussing ideas, and then getting feedback from you guys out there in the community, getting feedback from you to see, hey, how can we make these ideas work? Or why will these ideas not work? I'm not setting up to fail, but if I fail with any of these ideas, then let me know. I mean, I am not objected. I think that's the right word. I'm not against having people come and tell me that my 20, 30-minute podcast that I made is complete trash and my idea that I spent all this time developing is not worth even considering. I have no problem with that. But I do think the licensing of patents idea is a good start. I don't think we should just make our patents accessible for free because of the investment cost in them. And okay, so it can be paid for by taxes, but if it's paid for retroactively and maybe it will need an upfront tax pool in order to initiate the funding, but once you start licensing stuff off, maybe the licensing is more than enough to cover the product. I mean, how many phones does Apple sell every single year? It's tens of millions, if not hundreds. If the US makes $2 from these licensing taxes for each phone, and this isn't even considering other possible forms of taxation like VAT taxes and whatnot. This is just purely off the license for that product. So this is money going straight back to NASA. I mean, that would be easily tens to hundreds of millions of dollars of funding for them right there. And on our multi-trillion-dollar government budgets, that may not sound like much, but it'll add up because that might just be from one license. If maybe, so they did the GPS technology. Maybe they also got the form of touchscreen technology from NASA. I don't know. I don't know what all the patents they got from NASA are, but say they've got 5, 10, 20. Every single one. Oh, that's another dollar. That's another dollar. That's another dollar. Eventually, and just from this one company, the government could be making hundreds of millions to billions of dollars. And that's just looking at one company. If we get to more companies, it'll just expand that much more. And that could very quickly pile up to be large sums of money. NASA may actually end up, if they did something like this, they could potentially end up with more funding than they currently get from our administrations and from our Congress. Just because they're so well able to monetize what they do. And I know that in the end, all of these costs will end up back in the hands of the consumers. I'm aware of that because in the end, the only one who pays taxes is the consumer. Any taxes companies have to pay, they will charge onto the consumer so that they have more onto their customer, so they have more money to pay those taxes, so that they can still make the profit they want post taxes. I know that that's how this tends to work, but even still, I think finding ways to expand funding that doesn't directly just take money from people in a way that people have no say as to what aspects of government it goes to. I feel like that is probably my biggest issue with taxes. The fact that we cannot say where in the government our specific money goes to. And that's also because Congress gets to decide the budgets for everywhere, and all programs. So everyone already knows what they're getting because Congress is deciding it. And Congress is our representatives. So in a way, we are deciding where our taxes go. But I still would like to give more power to the people over the representatives for this case. And I think enabling alternative ways of funding so that the utility of government will help spur the funding. Whatever people get the most value out of is what gets the most value put into it. I think that would be probably the best way to do taxes. Social Security could be an opt-in tax. I would personally love that because I don't expect to ever get Social Security, for one thing. And for another thing, I'd rather just put the money in a 401k that I have control over. I like having my own control over these types of things. For Medicare and Medicaid, I mean, maybe I don't want to put the money there. Maybe I would rather go down to a shelter and just give a homeless shelter the funding so that they could take care of people, or to local charities, or maybe I just want to save that money for my own medical needs because I personally have medical needs that are recurring and covering expenses like this. I think being able to prioritize myself before helping others is essential. That's why when people fly and the oxygen masks come down, they say, help yourself first. Put the mask on yourself first. Because if you faint, if you are out of it, you can't help anyone. So you need to help yourself first. You help yourself, then you're able to help everyone else all the more so. That is the approach I tend to take with most things in my life. I like to see it as a first come, first serve. I am the first come, so I will be the first serve, and then go from there. Go outwards from myself. But maybe I'm just rambling a little bit now. Anyhow, that will do it, I think, for today's podcast. Usually I like to hit the 30-minute mark, but I think I've really covered a lot of stuff here, and I believe it will be good to get some more feedback on this one from you guys. So, I'm going to let it go here. Thank you all for listening, and I will catch you later. Bye-bye.